Over on Patreon, I asked all my subscribers what they're struggling with on their instruments, and Ben got in touch and he said soloing with scales. So that's what this video is all about. So there's lots of tips that I'm going to give you, and it's in a step-by-step process. Now this is for people who are confident enough on their instruments, but maybe new to soloing, or they just don't know where to start. This isn't for complete beginners to guitar who are getting used to notes and chords. It's for people who have got that kind of solid foundation and are just wanting to get stuck into soloing. Now I will say at the end of this, you're not going to sound like Jimi Hendrix just yet. However, it's going to just give you that solid foundation and that confidence just to get you going with soloing. Anyway, enough of me rambling on, let's get stuck into the tips. Tip 1 is all about thinking small. Now we're going to use a A minor pentatonic scale. Now if you don't know that, it's on the screen, and the notes are on the E string 5 to 8, then on the next 3 strings 5 to 7. So that's the A string 5 7, D string 5 7, G string 5 7, then the B and the E strings 5 and 8. So just to play through that scale all the way through. I want you to get really used to that scale, not only ascending like I have there, but also descending. Now for this example, we're not actually going to use all the notes in that scale. What we're going to do is use just 4 notes, specifically on the D and G strings, D5-7 and G5-7. What we're going to do is limit ourselves for this next solo when you actually come to making your own solo, and I'm going to give you a demonstration now. In fact, I've got a loop pedal down below. On the Patreon page, if you're a subscriber, you will have links to some really good backing tracks that I like and that I solo over, so you can do some of the same, and it fits over this A minor pentatonic scale. So here's my backing track. That's an A minor chord, and that's an F major chord. That's going to loop around. And for this solo, I'm just going to use the D and the G strings, 5 and 7. And what I'm going to do is play long notes, I can play short notes, I can play fast notes, slow notes. I'm going to do whatever I want, but I'm only allowed to use those 4 notes. And the idea is we're limiting ourselves to see how creative we can be with just a small selection of notes. So here's my example that I'd like then you to pause this video, go and find a backing track, or if you have a loop pedal, A minor and F would work, and see what you can come up with. Here's my attempt. And there we go. So there is a solo with just 4 notes. Now hopefully, if you listen back to that, you'll be able to spot lots of different things. There were times where I held a note for several beats. Now don't be afraid to have long held notes. One of the most common things that I spot with people who solo for the first time is that they must fill every single gap with notes. Not the case. You're allowed to have lots of gaps. I also want you to think about repetition as well. You saw there when I was playing that I used lots of repetition. There's kind of a bit of a lick that I always go to. You probably heard me repeat that sometimes a bunch of times in a row. And that's absolutely fine. That's okay. And you could maybe change around it a little bit. So for example, if I did that, the next time I could change it ever so slightly. So I could put in an extra note there, changes it a little bit, and I'm experimenting. That's the whole point of this, to experiment to see what sounds good, but more importantly, what sounds bad, because then you can avoid it or change it. The key thing to take away from step 1 is to think basic. Few notes, Don't feel like you have to go crazy with the rhythms. As long as you're feeling that beat of the backing track or your loop pedal or whatever you're using to solo with, feel that beat. Get your foot tapping to the pulse. That's really, really important, so you're in tune with the rhythm. It sounds very hippie, but it's really important that you get that groove going. You'll notice when you hear musicians play live, or when you watch them play live, you'll often see the foot's tapping or they're moving the body to the beat. That helps them keep in tune with the guitar and keeps them focused on the rhythm. Step 2, we're going to add a few more details. The first thing we're going to do is add an extra string. So we've already got D and G, 5-7-5-7. We're now going to include the B string 5 and 8. So we now have 2 extra notes to include in this solo. However, we're going to add an extra technique that's outside of the scale to think of your soloing. And that technique is offbeat playing. And that is another word for that is syncopation. So in music, usually we'll count in either groups of 4 or 3. In my solo and in most solos, there'll be groups of 4. So you'll have 4 strong beats like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, in between those beats, musicians tend to say the word and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. And those are the offbeats, the kind of syncopation note. And when we play on those offbeats, it can sound really interesting. And I want you to try and play not just on the offbeats, which sounds a bit strange to say, but I want you to maybe start a few of your little riffs on the offbeat. So, as an example of that, there's my backing track. I'm going to count along, and I'm going to start on beat 3 and. 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So just by starting on the offbeat, it kind of sounds quite nice. You get this kind of more sophisticated type of sound by doing such a simple thing. Rather than always starting on the first beat, having the offbeat, so a lot of those notes there were off the beat, and being able to do that is a really kind of neat hack. Let's say, I don't like saying the word hack, I'm probably going to edit that out, but it's a really good technique to use just to add a little bit more sophistication and a bit more professionalism to your soloing. Now, patrons are going to get a bit more help on that in the Patreon exclusive video, so feel free to check that out. There's a link in the description, more about that later. But yeah, really good technique to use. So just to put in a solo where I include the new string and a bit of the syncopation, let's give that a go with my solo. If you want to just skip to the next tip, there's a timestamp on the screen. Here we go. Just before we move on to the next tip, I want to say thank you to the people on the screen. Those are my patrons. Now, for videos like this, patrons not only get their name on the screen, but they get extra content. So for every Patreon help video that I'm making, which is this video, they will get an extra video which delves into the tips that I'm showing you in more detail. I'm also going to give them extra PDFs and things like sheet music of all the scales and finger patterns. They get access to all of that. Now, if that's something that interests you, there's a link in the description. You also get early access content. This video comes out a week early for them. They also get to ask me for help and suggestions on what videos to make. Ben asked me to make this video, he's now got it. Last month, someone else requested some strumming help, they got that. So you could be next month. So if that's interesting, head on over and you can sign up there. Anyway, back on with the video. Tip 3 is all about rhythm and getting used to playing different rhythms. Now, in my opinion, then a rhythm is a little bit more important than the actual pitch. A lot of people think when it comes to soloing you must learn all the scales in lots of different positions. That's great and that's really important to know, but if you don't have a good sense of rhythm, then your solos are really going to suffer. So let's come up with a good few tips to help you out with that. And the first thing we're going to do is come up with a simple rhythm that you're going to use with those notes that we've already looked at. So we've got 5/7, 5/7, 5/8 on the D, G and B strings. They're the only notes we won't use again. However, what we're going to do is come up with a rhythm where we can use for those notes. And the rhythm we're going to do is this. 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you've got slow, slow, fast, fast, slow, long note, 2, 3, 4. Now the idea is you're going to use that rhythm on any notes that we've got. Let's try it with that backing track again. So I'll count myself in after 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can hear I've got that rhythm, dun, 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 dun. But I'm using it on different notes. I'll give you another example. Now that rhythm there, you know, sounds basic, that's the idea, it's to get you used to it. We're not aiming to sound like Jimi Hendrix just yet, it's to get this ball rolling using different rhythms. And for patrons, I will be putting a few different rhythms and a few examples in the Patreon exclusive video for you to then experiment with yourself. So tip 4 is all about using the full scale. Hopefully by now you'll have practiced a few times where you've got a little bit more confident with the notes and you can now elaborate by using the full scale. Now I'm not going to jump into a solo with the full scale, but it's something for you to experiment with. However, what we are going to look at is an extra thing as well, and that is to do with arpeggios. Now if you're unfamiliar with arpeggios, it's basically where we take a chord and play those notes in order. So for example, as we're in the key of A minor, because we're using the A minor pentatonic scale, what we've got is for an A minor chord, which fits over the first chord in my backing track that I've been using, we could use these notes here. E string 5/8, then 7 on the A string, we've got 7 on the D string, and then on the last 3 strings, 5/5/5. We can focus on those notes if we know that the chord is the same. So if we're playing it over an A minor chord, we could use an A minor arpeggio. And using those notes can really emphasize what you're soloing with. So for example, you won't get any wrong notes is what I'm trying to say. If you've got an A minor chord and an A minor arpeggio, all the notes will fit. And in this example, we're going to go over another new chord. So I'm going to play A minor followed by D minor in my solo. And for D minor, for our arpeggio, we can play on the A string, 5/8, then 7, 7, 6, 5. And it would be good to get used to ascending and descending with those two arpeggios if you were to play over A minor and D minor. Patrons, you've got a backing track that has those two chords on it. Let's have a bit of a noodle around where I solo just using arpeggios. So that can be a tricky thing because you have to play one arpeggio and then change to another arpeggio shape in the same chord progression. However, it's just another way to try and push the different types of sounds you can get. One of the most common things that beginners do when they solo is feel as if everything's just a little bit random or that it doesn't have meaning when you're playing it. So you could be thinking, oh, yeah. It feels like you're just going anywhere on the guitar to try and make some sounds, even if you know the notes that work well in a scale. And what I'm trying to say is, when you come up with a little phrase, a little melodic idea, it shouldn't be random. And what I want you to do is try and come up with phrases that are close together in the scale. So for example, in that A minor pentatonic scale that we looked at in the very start, the last few notes, 5, 8, 5, 8. Those are, let's say, next door neighbours in the scale. So I want you to come up with some phrases when you next solo that use just next door neighbours. You're only allowed to move from one note to the next door neighbours either side. So for example, the 5 on the high E string has a higher neighbour up to number 8 on the same string. Or the next note down from there, its neighbour is fret 8 on the B string. So your rule for this next phrase in the next solo is going to be, when you move from one note to the next, move either up one or down one, like this. Or, and when you get to that new note, follow the rule again, either move up one or move down one. So I'm on now 8, I can either move back to that number 5 because that's one up from there, or I can move down to the 5 on the same string because that's the next note down. I'm now going to use that in a solo, but I'm going to go nice and slow so you can hopefully follow what I'm doing. I'm also going to have long gaps, so after I've come up at the end of a phrase, group of 4 or 5 notes, I'll then hold a note and use a bit of vibrato just to end that little melodic sentence. More about that later. Here we go. So all the way through that solo, hopefully you could spot I was going one note up or one note down each time. That's going to do a few things. First of all, get you used to playing that full scale back and forth in a kind of a new way rather than just playing the scale. It gets you playing more coherently, because phrases shouldn't be overly random. Our brains love repetition, they love patterns, and having this kind of constant little flow works really, really well, and that's how a lot of music is made. However, having some skips in there really, really helps and just makes things a little bit more interesting as well. And what I mean by a skip is having a few of those jumps away from those steps. So skips and steps are a really kind of important term in music. So we've got steps here. It's all next door neighbour notes. However, if we jump over a couple, sometimes that can sound really good. So we could do things like this. So there I went from the high A note to 5 there. Look, there's a couple of notes I missed out. The 5 here and the 8 there. I went there. It's got a bit of an interesting sound there. Clashes a little bit, but also works. And I came up with an interesting rhythm for it. So skips can really help as well. So I'd experiment with lots of different notes that are close together with a couple of skips in between. Give that a try. The final tip I'm going to leave you with is not to be afraid to go outside of the scale. A scale is just a group of notes that tend to work well together, and we give it a name. That's in essence what it's all about. When it comes to soloing, any note is fair game, and sometimes the notes that are outside of the scale can work really, really well, depending on the context. And the kicker is, it all is experimentation. There's no hard and fast rule saying, oh, try this scale, but also this extra note here, because it's all to do with the harmony behind it, the chords behind it, and lots of other things. So experiment with it. But I do have a couple of ideas that, again, might help you just to experiment with. So I'm going to try the A minor, D minor backing track that I've got. And the scale that we've been using, the A minor pentatonic, always has a 5. 5, 8, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 7, 5, 8, 5, 8. There's no number 4s there. Now, I'm going to use a couple of number 4s to help slide into number 5. And they sound a little bit off. In fact, I'm going to demonstrate by playing the backing track and purposely play those number 4s. It's going to sound, let's say, not so nice. But then when I actually play a proper solo, you're going to see, oh, hold on, that actually works a little bit. Watch this. So there's my A minor chord. Number 4 doesn't sound nice, does it? Yeah, not nice at all. However, when it resolves up by the number 5, it works really well like this. tension and release. Yeah. Oh, there's a nice phrase. I use that number 4. Also, repetition there. I had the same few ideas, same rhythm back and forth, and it set it in that this note, in context, worked really well. Experiment with the other number 4s. You see there, it didn't really work very well. And you see there, I even made a mistake. I accidentally played fret 7. Who cares? Mistakes are fine. But that number 4 can work really well in the right context. Another good scale to incorporate, if let's say if you get a little bit bored with the A minor pentatonic, is the blues scale, which you can see on the screen now. This basically takes the scale that we've already learned and then adds a few extra notes in between. And the blues works really, really well for solo. It's a fantastic one, not only to learn on guitar, but on piano as well, because I play piano and it's a fantastic instrument to play the blues on. But for guitar, it works just as well. So check out that once you start feeling like you're getting a little bit used to, or maybe a little bit bored of that pentatonic. One final tip, just before I let you go, is that usually, if you play a note that doesn't work well, and let's say it's even in the scale, or maybe outside of the scale, usually you can escape by going one note up or one note down. So for example, the A minor pentatonic scale that we had, let's just say I had fret 7 on the B string. If I went up, because that's not part of the scale, if I went up one, fret 8 is part of the scale, which we've already discussed. So if I was noodling around and I accidentally played that fret 7 like I did a couple of minutes ago, there we go. I've now resolved it by moving up one. So that works really, really well. In fact, moving it down to fret 6 would have worked really well as well. You can see there's a little bit of resolution there. So when you have a note that doesn't work very well, just then go up one fret or down one fret, as in one semitone up or down, and usually you'll find a note that works really well. And then, another tip that I was told, just do it again, and then people won't think you're making a mistake. So if you made a mistake, do it again, and people think you're doing it intentionally. People think, yeah, good solo. The main thing I want you to take away from this is don't use it as just one tip, then practice. Second tip, then practice. I want you to really get stuck into each one. Do each tip several times in a row. That's really going to help. The repetition of this just really embeds the ideas. And if you sign up to Patreon, you'll get lots of extra advice on this topic. There's an extra video, there's PDFs to download, which will help you through all the scales, and they get lots of other perks as well, like early access content. They get this a week early. They get their name on the screen, they also get lots of other things. I always ask my patrons kind of what they need help with, and every month I make these videos. So if that's interesting, head on over to the link in the description. So thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think of it, and yeah, that's about it. So thanks for watching. I shall see you in the next video.